Okay, next we're going to provide the same information that we tackled under instruction 1, which is to the left of the mouse. You can see it there. We're going to provide the same information for October. Alright, so here's our October cost of production report, and I'll go a little bit quicker this time because I think we've explained exactly what happened in September, and going through it in October is going to be much the same technique. So first we need to come up with the units charged to production, and this time we start off the year with the 6,000 units, remember, that are on hand in October, and the 165,000 were transferred in from the smelting department this month, so we've got 171,000 units to account for. Next, we need to figure out how many units need to be assigned to the various equivalent units categories. So, what was beginning in inventory at the beginning of October was 4/5 complete. So if we take 20% of that, we come up with 1,200 units just to the left of my mouse to come up with the conversion component for inventory that was on hand at the beginning of the period. Then the amount that was started and completed was the 158,200, which is the 165,000 units received from smelting, less the 6,800 units that were on hand at the end. Okay, and finally we have from that we need to calculate what was transferred to finished goods. So we add the whole units together. We transferred 164,200, of which 158,200 represented those units that were started and completed as to direct materials, and then we add the beginning plus what was started and completed for conversion cost to come up with 159,400 equivalent units that were transferred to finished goods in October, representing the equivalent units of conversion costs. Okay? Finally, we had the ending inventory in process, 6,800 units. All of that work was completed during the month of October, so we use 6,800 equivalent units as to materials, right? We assume either the material was applied at the beginning of the production, which is a very normal assumption, or it was applied evenly through production, right? But in this case, we're assuming it was there to be worked on for the entire month. Okay, and as for conversions, it was 2/5 complete. So we take 2/5 or 40% of that 6,800, right, to come up with 2,720 units of equivalent units completed during the month of October. Okay, if we sum those, we come up with the total units to be assigned, and down here we see the various calculations that I just walked through. Okay, now for the month of October, let's look at what we have for costs. We have to figure out the total cost for October in the rolling department, and from the information provided above, this month we have 6,930,000 of direct material costs and 2,067,000. Let me read that: $2,067,030 of conversion cost. And if you need to see where those numbers come from, stop the multimedia presentation, slide back to the beginning where you can read where those numbers were provided. Okay, so total equivalent units, which we just calculated above, was 165,000 and 162,120. And that's that number above my mouse and that number above my mouse. That one is for direct materials, that one's for conversion cost. When we do the division, we come up with $42 of cost per equivalent unit and $12.75 for conversion. Next, we need to figure out how to apply the cost to the various components of the various layers, if you will, of the inventory we had. Okay, so we had inventory in process at the beginning of the year, 308,280. We had cost incurred of $8,997,030. Okay, now that $800,997,030 is calculated as follows. It's the sum of the $6,930,000 right there, plus the components that made up the $206,730 that's given earlier in the problem. Okay, so a total cost to account for is 9305310, and if we added these across, we would come up with that same 9305. That's incorrect. The 9305310 is the total of the numbers we add across plus the inventory in the inventory, the dollar amount of inventory in beginning inventory. I apologize, everyone. I'm getting a little tongue-tied here. Okay, so cost allocated to complete and partially completed goods. We have the 308,280 of the beginning inventory, and then we need to compute. We need to complete the inventory in process, and we come up with $15,300, where we use the 1275 conversion cost above times the 1,200 units, right, that represented that appropriate layer, taken from right there, left of my mouse. Okay, and if I slide on down, we've got the same kind of calculations for the started and completed. 6644 400 is multiplied times the $42, or is the number of units multiplied times the $42. Okay, and I believe that's the 158,200 units used right there. And then we use 2017-050, which is again the 158,200 of started and completed units times the 1275 rate. We add across to come up with the number to the left of my mouse. Then we figure what was transferred into finished goods. We can just sum down, we come up with that. In inventory and ending, we take the $42 times the units we had in ending, which was 6,800 equivalent units, and this time we're using that 6,800 for direct material, and then the 2720 times the 1275 gives us the 34,680 that's used there to sum to 320,000, and we equal the 9305310, which matches the total cost accounted for in the rolling department. Okay, I'll slide down a little bit so you can see the various footnotes to this calculation. And if you need to look at that in any more depth, please stop the multimedia presentation, figure out where you're at, and when you're ready, we'll go forward. All right, now let's slide back to the top and take a look at the next part of this problem. Okay, if you look at instruction 1, it told us to enter the balances of September 1st, 2008 in a 4-column account for work in process rolling. And in the number 2, we need to repeat that for October. Well, we've never gone through that. So now that we all have the data from the production schedules, let's show how that gets used. And I'll slide up and we'll just illustrate it. Okay, there's our work in process account. This is simply the work in process account in the general ledger. We've got columns for current period debits and credits, and then we carry the balance. Okay, so we had a balance of $176,300 on September 1st. We were told that $6,195,000 was transferred into the smelting department, right? And so using the numbers and the cost that we came up with before, we're able to drop the dollars in the appropriate places. Okay, so the direct labor shows up as an increase of $773,780. The factory overhead shows up as a debit to the work in process of $1,138,900. And then, as a result of all our calculations, we came up with a total amount to be transferred to finished goods of $7,975,700 for the month of September. If you don't know where that number comes from, go back in the demo, maybe to part 1, and look for where that number appears, and you'll see it is a calculated number that we need to make the entry. Sometimes students get confused on why we do all this work, and the whole purpose of it is to debit the next stage in the work in process, or to debit finished goods if it's the last step, and to credit the work in process of the particular department we're working with. Well, that number right there shows us that, if you will, debit to finished goods and the credit to the last work in process department, the rolling department. And that's why we put the whole production report together. Okay, then we see the results of October down below. And again, you should be able to go back through the illustration, find where those numbers are, and maybe take a screenshot of it and then bring the tape back to here, and you'll see that all of those numbers were either given or we computed them, particularly that 8,985,030, which was an item that we calculated at the end of our costs just a few moments ago. And then we wind up with the 6,800 units that were 2/5 complete, and the cost assigned to that was the 320,280, and that's how we show its balance in the work in process account. So we're ready to begin this process again for the month of November. Okay, the last thing we need to do is part 3, which is to comment on the changes in cost per equivalent unit that we saw from August through October. Okay, now I've slid back down and I want to show you the solution to that comment, which is that we saw cost of equivalent unit for direct materials increase from $41 to $41.30 and then up to $42. So we're seeing an increase in equivalent unit per direct materials. Okay, for conversion cost it increased from $12.30 to $12.60 and then to $12.75 in the month of October. And the comment is that we should investigate these costs to make sure we understand why, to see if there is anything we can do to control our cost. Obviously, we're a profit-seeking business, and our goal is to have the highest revenues and the lowest cost. So if we see a cost increase, we want to take actions to lower them as best we can. And that takes care of this problem, everyone. Thank you.